When you're approaching death in the near future, time seems to slow down and everything life becomes more beautiful as you enjoy what's left of your time on Earth. However, when you make it through a near-death experience, it can afterward be filled with some regrets. Sure, you might be happy that you survived, but you may not be happy with how relationships and experiences ended in your past. It is of course not possible to really live those events, but it may be possible to address them one by one, to try and make things right before the curtains finally do close on your life. If you missed the third tale, Destitution, please don't forget to listen to the reading. I'll drop a hover card in the upper right that you can click on, or in the description below. The tales are best read in sequential order. I hope that you will find this particular tale interesting, and please feel free to leave any comments or feedback. This is the fourth tale of Cancerika with 8 more to go, so I'm really hoping you like the overall story. If you happen to have your own cancer experience you'd like to share, that'd be wonderful too. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can catch more tales as they are released. Please enjoy the fourth tale of Cancerika, Recollection, Letters from Purgatory. Cancerika, Tales of Survival, Despair, and Hilarity. Written and narrated by Beauheart. Tale number 4, Recollection, Letters from Purgatory. A time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verse 4. Returning to consciousness on an operating table after the most intense dream of your life was a bit of a jolt, to say the least. It was a wild trip where I went from a terrible misandrous nightmare, then to getting life instructions from the good Lord, and finally to getting scolded by a bunch of faceless medical personnel hiding behind masks. Why didn't you come to the hospital when you injured your hand? Don't you know cancer patients are susceptible to sepsis? Next time, call us. I was 12 years old all over again, getting lectured for smoking a cigarette behind the middle school dumpster. I'm sorry, was the best reply I could muster. I was having a lot of trouble forming words in my mouth. It felt like I was chewing on 10 sticks of bubble gum. I must have been doped up beyond belief. I looked down at my left hand. It was wrapped tightly in a series of bandages that were closed off with 3 metal clips, but it was still there. No, we didn't have to amputate, if that's what you're wondering, one of the doctors said. But a few more hours at this level of blood poisoning, we may have had to. Well, that's a relief, I thought. Knowing my luck the past week, they probably would have amputated the wrong hand. Instead of getting upset about being treated like a wayward child, I took the high road. I graciously thanked the team and let them wheel me into the inpatient wing of the hospital. The hospital room where they parked me smelled like a mixture of Lysol and old people. I was jammed in a corner with no window and closed off by a series of curtains. There was room for one more hospital roommate, but it was vacant when they brought me in, and I hadn't heard anyone over there just yet. I really despise being in lonely places like this, so I silently plotted my escape. There was some sort of beeping monitor attached to me with a series of cables, and I had a steady IV drip that had been going for at least a couple hours. I think it was antibiotics or something, but I was so accustomed to being poked and prodded like a pincushion that I didn't really care anymore. I tried flipping on the tiny flat screen with the remote using my good right hand, but it was a bunch of really boring stuff. Silly game shows, snooze-fest dramas, and, CNN. The commercials were all pharmaceutical advertisements and bozos with gleaming white teeth hawking timeshares. This hospital cable TV, and I believe broadcast television in general, was obviously geared to those over 55 years of age. There was just no room for programming with the underperforming consumers in my age demographic. My phone still had some juice in it, so I was able to watch something a bit more my speed, true crime docs on YouTube. However, I was still miserable. I hated being confined to a space where I couldn't get anything done, unable to do anything productive with total brain rot. I just had to sit in my bed like a Halloween pumpkin waiting to rot in the middle of November. Fortunately, an attendant came in with dinner to break up the monotony. It looked like a chicken rice dish of some sort, and it had watermelon slices and tapioca neatly placed on either side of the main dish. I hadn't had a dessert like that since I was little. Looks great, and my compliments to the chef. Thank you, I said to the attendant. It ain't much, but at least you don't have to tip me, the young man joked. Hey, you need me to get the nurse to take a look at your hand? Thank you, sir, I replied. While chowing down on my rubber chicken and lukewarm rice feast via spork, the nurse finally arrived. She slowly removed the bandage on my left hand. I took a peek down myself and noticed a massive amount of black stitching across the palm going down to the wrist. They must have really had to slice that sucker open to get in there at the infection. Can you move your wrist forward and then back? She asked mechanically. I wiggled my fingers a bit. They were in decent shape. But when I tried moving my wrist slowly, it barely budged. The nurse gave a little bit of a pinch on the back of my hand, and an excruciating bolt of pain went all the way down to my elbow. How did that feel? She asked. It was a doozy, I replied, holding in my breath. Let's get you some more Demerol. She wheeled over a little table with a big needle sitting on a sterile piece of green cloth. I looked at it like it was a little birthday present from a degenerate friend who left a party favor on top of the bathroom sink. She quickly overstretched my arm and stuffed the needle's plunger deep into my vein. I enjoyed watching her slightly pull the plunger back and then pressing it all down at once. The technique was quite impressive, and the high was instantaneous. I definitely couldn't feel any pain in my left hand anymore. Heck, I couldn't feel anything anymore. I laid back on my pillow with my plastic tub of half-eaten dinner hovering over my chest. Anywhere outside of a hospital context, I would have looked like a total junkie. Your oncologist is making his rounds before he goes home. He'll be in shortly, the nurse informed me. Thank you so much, I mumbled without moving my lips like a ventriloquist dummy. Having been blasted off to the moon with the Demerol, I sat in my own private intergalactic euphoria, not contemplating much of anything. I used the spork to pull the tapioca into my gaping mouth like I was a little baby. I could actually taste it. And the sugary slop was delicious. I eased back on my pillow and zoned out. I was grateful that the dope shut off my mind because I admit to being a bit hesitant about analyzing the dream I had while getting surgery. I wasn't shocked that I got an angelic visit. After all, it happened all the time throughout the Bible, and I've been a pretty big believer the last 5 years. But the only other time an angel came to little old me to actually deliver God's instructions was over 10 years ago. When I was a 20-year-old wayward bum, I was working part-time at a game and hobby shop called The Dungeon Keep. My duties and responsibilities included jockeying the cash register, helping other nerds pre-order the upcoming Halo release, and smoking weed in my truck during my lunch breaks. The owner, a gigantically fat gentleman named Larry, had to unfortunately shut down the place when a GameStop opened up in the same strip mall. This left me unemployed without any plans for the short or long-term future. My days pretty much involved getting chunky off a diet of Cheetos and Miller Lights and living in Mom's unfinished basement. The couch I was relegated to smelled like cat pee. My old room was occupied by one of her new boyfriend's preteen daughters, and my mother was trying to subtly get me to leave the nest. After an evening of pounding a six-pack with my buddies in an open field far outside the city, I was feeling a bit buzzed and exhausted, so I decided it would be a good idea to drive my beat-up old Ford Ranger back home. To avoid getting pinched by the cops for a drunk driving charge, I had the ingenious plan to take the secret back roads to return to my mom's place in town. I was fumbling around with my iPod, if you can remember those, trying to cue up some black metal. The Norwegians in guyliner makeup with massive bullet belts were quite popular among my peers at the time. The road was really dark as I came barreling down it. I almost didn't see a mother and father with their kids standing off to the left of their truck, fixing a flat on the right shoulder. Looking up from my iPod, I swerved at the last minute and bumped the guardrail on the left shoulder. My rear wheel tires then got squirrely, and I spun around 180 degrees. Picking my head up after almost wrecking, I was looking straight at them about 20 yards away with my high beams on. At first, they stood there in a total state of shock, like a family of deer. Then the mother grabbed her son, pulled him close to her chest, and she gave me the most cutting look I've ever received in my life. I did one of the most ridiculous things you can think of, but it probably saved me from a lot of legal trouble. I slunk way back into the bench seat so they couldn't see me through the windshield, and I backed away down the road and reversed. Despite it being the world's slowest escape, they didn't bother chasing me down. They just kept glaring at me like I was pure evil incarnate that had been sent to ruin their lives. In those days, the state didn't require front license plates, so they were never able to report my vehicle. When I was a 20-year-old boozer, I almost never had any dreams, but that particular night I had a real lucid one. I was in an abandoned insane asylum, kind of like the place in that old flick Session 9. Wandering around, I could see writing and illustrations on the walls from the former inmates of the institution. There were crude caricatures of screaming people with snakes coming out of their heads, catching on fire. Phrases like "judgment cometh" and "vengeance is mine" were scrawled underneath. Suddenly I heard a voice from one of those old-time reel-to-reel recorders they had in the 70s. It was lo-fi and riddled with static, but it was probably the most soothing voice I've heard. "You must join the military tomorrow and fight for your country. It's the only path for you at this time. Don't delay." His voice I had never heard before, but I felt this odd sense that I was familiar with him my entire life. I woke up right away in a deep sweat on my mom's stinky cat piss couch. Even though I was still pretty hungover, I went down to the recruiter that day as I was instructed. 1 week later, I was off to boot camp in San Diego and standing on the famous yellow footprints. I got snapped back into the reality of the hospital when I suddenly heard footsteps approaching my little area of curtained solitude. "Hey, there you are," my oncologist doctor said, peeking his head in. "Heard you had a little problem with sepsis today, so I most definitely wanted to check in." "Yeah, doc, don't ever try cutting a frozen bagel. They should have a warning on those things like they do with cigarettes," I replied. "Well, here's the thing with the chemotherapy and your particular type of cancer. Your immune system is incredibly weak during this treatment period, so sepsis is one of the biggest threats. If you ever get a fever of any sort of a cut from an infection, you need to go check into the ER immediately. It doesn't matter how minor you think it is," the doctor stated. "I think I learned that the hard way," I replied. "Well, I'm sure the ER team already gave you the nagging lecture, but I'm just glad you're okay. I've given instructions to the nurses on how to administer your prescribed medications while you're inpatient. I'm told you only need to stay a few days, so that's the good news. Looks like your kidneys didn't get shut down by the shock from the infection, and the blood work came back okay. We'll have you back during your outpatient chemo really soon," the doctor said. "Thanks for the visit," I said, giving a thumbs up with my good hand. "I've seen a lot of sepsis cases with my patients. It's totally recoverable, so don't get too anxious. However, sepsis usually only happens after several months of chemo wearing down the body. You've only been fighting this disease about a week. You're a strong young guy. Don't give up just yet on me. Good night," the doctor said as he left the room. "Thanks for your help, Doc. Appreciate you," I said, but he had already left the room and vanished down the hall. It was a relief to me that I'd only be stuck in the hospital a few days instead of a few weeks. But I still had to find some way to occupy my mind. Just sitting there waiting for the nurse to give me a shot and to slowly nibble on mediocre food wasn't going to allow me to pass the time. Luckily, I heard the voice of what sounded like my boss, Shane, and his wife, Mary, coming from outside the room. "What room did they say, babe? I think it was 1304. Is this it?" Mary asked in her distinctive squeaky-pitched voice. "In here, guys," I hollered enthusiastically, even though it hurt my chest to move my diaphragm that much. "Hey, there's the guy of the hour," Shane said, patting me on the shoulder. Mary leaned in for a gentle hug. "How did you two know I was here?" I asked. "I'm your emergency contact with HR, remember? We heard you had a little trouble with your hand," Shane said. "Yeah, it was almost death by bagel. It would have made for a hilarious epitaph. I could have been featured on one of those Darwin Award cringe compilations," I said. "Really? How bad did it get?" Shane asked. "Want to see it? It's totally gross," I replied in jest. No thank you," Mary chimed in. "We're just glad you're still with us in this world. Here, I brought you some raisin cookies that were supposed to be for the church bake sale on Sunday, but I want you to have most of them." She pulled out a concealed plastic tub of cookies stuffed to the brim from inside her coat. It was like she was smuggling narcotics into prison, and I was grateful. "Thanks, Mary. This will help keep the meals interesting," I said, stashing the cookie tub in the little drawer beside my hospital bed. Shane followed up with, "I also brought you a laptop from home you can screw around on. I think it's got a Steam account with some points I bought a while ago, so go nuts with the games while you're stuck here. Also, here's a bunch of phone chargers. I didn't know which one you needed." I plucked the Android one out of the bunch and said, "You two are lifesavers, you know that?" "Well, we can't stay long because the kids are at their grandma's," Shane said, "but we're glad you're doing all right." "God bless," Mary said. "Back at you both," I replied. I always respected Shane and Mary, the ultimate trad couple. Mary actually had a law degree, but she stopped working after her first kid. Modern media would say that she was a loser for giving up on her dreams of making PowerPoints or whatever. But she always seemed pretty happy and content to me. She had my utmost respect. Shane was wonderful too, although I hated to admit that I always felt a bit of envy toward him. I mean, he was always a great guy and deserved his supervisor position with his level of knowledge, so I was fine with him being my boss. Heaven knows I've had some real morons in charge of me in the past. But I never knew how he built such a successful marriage. He seemed like such a geeky and awkward dude. I just couldn't get over my sin of envy. It's not that I felt entitled to a wife. I was just curious what went wrong in my life that led me to being perpetually single. I was genuinely surprised at how nice everyone was being to me. I guess being close to someone sick with cancer and laid up in a hospital bed makes people feel that acute sense of mortality in their own life. By being helpful to the sick and dying, in their hearts they know they want to be treated like that when their time comes. I wonder if I would have treated someone the same if they were sick with cancer and I was blessed with good health. Would I have shown that kindness? I'm not entirely sure. My mind continued to wander in strange places as the quiet of the hospital in late evening engulfed me. The interpretation of my most recent dream on that operating table was completely perplexing. It wasn't straightforward like the time I was told to join the military in my youth. A special purpose? Is that something I needed to discover right away, or to be revealed in due course? I wasn't sure if I was going to die sooner or later, even though it sounded like it wouldn't be the cancer that finally did me in. I figured I'd better start getting right with everyone in case it was time to depart sooner rather than later. In my head, I would occasionally concoct an alternate reality where I was a loving family man with a son. It not only allowed me to pass the time when bored, but I also hoped this mental trad LARP would make me a good father one day. I knew I needed to make things proper with this fictional family before I departed the proverbial mortal coil. I, of course, always wanted a real family I could call my own, but I didn't even know how to get a long-term girlfriend, let alone a wife and kid. Sure, I've had flings before, but those chicks usually ghosted me after a few weeks. Made-for-the-street types seemed to be attracted to me. I thought about who I actually loved instead of who just existed in the hypothetical sense. Who else should I get right with? My relationship with my mother was a bit complicated and fraught with some pretty big pitfalls, but I guess I loved her. Thinking about her usually brought simultaneous tears of joy and anger. It was a bit much while I was in a hospitalized state, so I quickly shifted my mind to other people that had come in and out of my life. I definitely loved my Marine buddies and definitely loved my friends from my youth. A smile came across my face as all the memories came rushing back of being around everyone and all the good times, even though I was alone on that hospital bed. It was like something out of a Bruce Springsteen song. If I was going to get my affairs settled, I needed to start with God more than anyone else. I thought of the Bible story of Zacchaeus, one of the top 5 greatest hits in my humble opinion. Not only is it hilarious because it is literally mentioned in the Bible that Zacchaeus is a manlet, but it shows that God can find you anywhere, even if you're hiding in a tree like he was. I had a similar story being found, albeit at the bottom of a bottle instead of a palm tree. Nevertheless, I felt I didn't deserve to be saved like Zacchaeus did. We had a similar origin story, although I was 5'10", so not officially a manlet. Zacchaeus gave away half his fortune to the poor in Christ's time. I was going to do him one better and give away my entire quarter Bitcoin in case I bit the big one. I fired up Shane's laptop and logged onto the hospital's janky Wi-Fi. The security on it was absolutely horrendous, but it was functional for research purposes as long as you didn't enter any personal information. I was able to find a template for a will that would be recognized by a judge in my state. A lawyer didn't even have to prepare it. I opened up a .txt and started copying, pasting, and typing. Holographic will. Upon my death, I hereby bequeath my 1/4 Bitcoin holdings to the Twin Calvary Church for the glory of God, to be used in assisting the poor, preferably. Signed. That was pretty easy. I checked the clock and it was getting pretty late. I didn't even know if there were night shift nurses at the hospital. It was so darn quiet. Instead of screwing around playing Counter-Strike or Elder Scrolls or whatever, I decided I needed to write some letters to everybody in my life. I tried out a little mental exercise to keep my mind preoccupied. I was going to die within the next 24 hours, and I had to bang out all these letters. My left hand wasn't totally out of commission. If I leaned it on the edge of the laptop, my fingers still worked fine for typing purposes. I thought about what I would say to Mom. That one would be tough, I thought. So I opted to go for the easy one first, which would be my main man, JC. I started typing away in the laptop's text editor. Dear God, thank you for rescuing me that night almost 10 years ago when I put the revolver to my temple in a drunken stupor. I thought I was a massive failure after I got out of the Marine Corps, and I wasn't sure what to do. You gave me purpose in life, and your grace has carried me this far. Your humble servant, signed. I really didn't like to talk about the time I almost blew my brains out alone in that crummy studio apartment I used to have. Fortunately, I stumbled upon a church the next morning, the one I still attend, and sat in the back. I was still intoxicated, in wrinkled clothes, and totally disheveled. It was a surreal experience getting filled with the Holy Spirit when you're the deepest of cynics and totally loaded. But I was lucky it happened. I wouldn't have been around to fight cancer at all if I hadn't been saved. Next up on the death letter list would be my buddies in the Marines. I thought that this one shouldn't be too difficult either. Even though there's a lot of things I didn't miss about being in the military, I definitely missed the guys. I joined for the monkeys, not the circus, as the saying goes. To my comrades in arms, it was an honor to serve with you all. Know that even though what we did might be judged as an error by history, you guys were the best I've seen of my generation. I think we were trying to do what was right, even if our leaders were wrong. I was never the bravest Marine, but I got to spend time with those that were. Also, Dubs, we love and miss you more than anything. Stay frosty, brother. Signed. Sergeant Dubarez, or just Dubs, as everyone called him, was an awesome guy and fantastic NCO. He's always helping out the new guys and had a very friendly style of leadership. He was a Texan and a real Chad that actually played college football at Texas A&M, until he had to drop out for financial reasons. You would have never thought he would get hit, but a Taliban rocket got him on that cursed route near Karachi. Our entire battalion was, of course, absolutely devastated by his passing. Moving further back in my life, I decided to get the letter done to my friends from before I shipped off to the Marines. Besides the occasional superficial social media interaction, I had unfortunately lost touch with a lot of these guys by the time I hit 30. Some of them moved away, some of them were married and too busy to hang out, and sadly a few of them had OD'd during the opiate crisis of the last decade. Since the personalities of my friend group varied widely, jocks, nerds, stoners, skaters, etc., I attempted to keep things rather general. 2 old friends. The happiest days of my life were spent clowning around with all you fellows. Although we didn't know it at the time, I think it was some of the most important days of our lives. I love you all very much. I look forward to reconnecting with you on the other side. Signed. That letter wasn't too bad to write, although it did bring a few tears to my eyes thinking about how I would never be able to relive those days of playing tackle football, yelling swear words through late-night Halo sessions, and smoking our first cigarette on the roof of Blockbuster. But I knew these types of events were special because they only existed in the past. Next up was Mom. Oh dear, this was going to be difficult, I thought. It's slightly embarrassing, but I never knew my father. My mom isn't even 100% sure who it is. So you can insert your broad generalizations about being raised by a single mom. Heck, I'll probably even agree with them. My mother is only 20 years older than me, and she always had a hard time when I was growing up. She could just never catch a break. I'm grateful that I never was starving and I was never beaten, but I seem to always only have dirty clothes to wear with a side of bologna for lunch, if you know what I'm saying. Once I taught myself how to take care of myself, things got a little bit better, but the resentment always lingered. It has really been difficult to let it all go. Dear Mommy, I'm sorry I wasn't a good boy, even though I tried my best. I just wanted to take care of you, but it was hard because... I stopped the letter and closed the file. I reckoned I'd better come back to that one at a later time and date when I wasn't in such bad shape. The final letter would be to my fictional son. Yes, it sounded a bit goofy, but I felt like I had some sage words of wisdom to give to a young lad. Perhaps I could give the letter to a real boy one day in the distant future. Dear son, I'm very proud of your accomplishments. Please don't get too upset about the small things in life. Also, don't get too distracted by worldly pleasures. If you open up your heart to God, it will be amazing what He will reveal to you. Love, Dad. Signed. I moved the .txt files to a secure folder on my phone for the time being and closed up Shane's laptop. It was very late, and I felt a sort of exhausted relief at having gotten all those letters done. I leaned slowly back on the pillow and went straight to bed. The sun was shining in the room when I awoke, and I could hear a lot of movement on the other side of the curtain. A nurse peeked her head inside my little area and asked, "How are we feeling this morning?" "Oh, you know, like $100, I replied. The opiates must have worn off because the pain in my hand was stinging. Is your hand throbbing? That's normal after sepsis, but it's a good sign since pain means the body is fighting off the infection. I can't give you any more Demerol though, honey. It's so strong you've already had so much that it might just kill you. Your Jamadones will help ease the pain though, the nurse explained. She brought in a bag of pills along with an illegible handwritten note from my oncologist, presumably explaining how to administer the meds. Don't worry, this ain't my first rodeo, the nurse said as she organized the pills. Here you go, she said, handing the morning ration to me in a little Dixie cup. I swished them down with some orange juice that an attendant must have kindly left. I heard a muffled cough and then heavy wheezing from the other side of the curtain. I tried to peek around the nurse, but I couldn't see what was going on. Oh, you've got a roommate now, she explained. His family's just on their way up. Want the curtain open? Sure, I could use the company, I said. The nurse quickly flung back the curtain and left the room to continue her rounds. A very, very old man, who must have been close to 100, was lying contorted on the bed. His body looked so badly misshapen you would have thought he got dropped from a 10-story building, even though there didn't appear to be any injuries. I guess that's just what happens at that advanced in age. He was extremely skinny, and he couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds. He kind of stared at me with sunken eyes. I wasn't sure what to do, so I said, "Hello there," and gave a quick nod. A large multi-generational family appeared in the hospital room and began filing in around him. The oldest woman was about 75, and she seemed to be running the show. Everybody get in and say goodbye to great-grandpa. I think this is finally it, she said somberly. The elderly woman started by leading each of the children to give him a hug. The old man managed to reach up his hand very slowly and pat everyone on the head, even though it was shaking uncontrollably. A little peanut of a girl that was about 6 even gave him a quick kiss on the forehead. I thought I saw him smile. Then the adults came in and rested their hands on his chest, one by one. Thanks for always taking care of me when times were hard, Gramps. We'll never forget you. You're such a strong man, a man in his 40s said as he bowed his head. One of the women began bawling and yelped, It's so hard to see him like this. He was such a larger-than-life figure. Just remember how things used to be, the oldest woman pointed out. I know I will. Goodbye, Dad. Thank you for everything. The elderly daughter leaned in for a hug. For the first time in my life, I heard the famous death rattle, a fluid escaping the lungs through the open mouth. And then I knew, and everyone else in the room knew, that the old gentleman had passed on. They all cried for a while, and a gaggle of nurses came in to cover the man up in bed sheets and respectively move the body out of the room. The family stood around for a while, looking down in solemn contemplation. I don't even think they noticed me up until that point, understandably. It wasn't until the elderly woman looked up and said, Oh, hi there, that I got an acknowledgement. Real sorry for your folks' loss. I'm sure he was a wonderful guy, I mustered. Thank you, young man. Are you doing okay? The elderly woman replied. They probably thought this was the place where you go to die room in the hospital, so they might have been overly sympathetic. Thank you, I'll be okay, I said as sincerely as possible. I always had wanted to die bravely with my boots on, but after seeing the older gentleman surrounded by a whole bevy of loved ones, I figured that wouldn't be a bad way to leave this world either. End of tale. Thank you for having listened to this tale of Cancerika. I hope that you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below whether you like the story or not. A forthcoming ebook, print book, and audiobook with all 12 tales will be released later in 2025 on Amazon and Audible. Details will be posted below in the description when it's released. You can shoot your mouth off at me over on X. I'm at Beauheart. Please visit friendlyfrogpress.com to see our collection of ebooks, paperbacks, and audiobooks that are for sale at Amazon and Audible. Until next time, this is Paul Beauheart signing off.